I'm going to introduce you. There we go. Okay. Yeah, you can sit. So Meryl is an attorney who specializes in third-party assisted reproduction. Like many of us that you've already heard, been in the field for over 20 years. And she is the owner of a comprehensive program that is devoted exclusively to this process. So I think that's good. You can read about her. You're going to get to hear her. She's fabulous. So here you go. And you can introduce your panel.
Thanks. Yeah, I know you guys are not here to hear about me. So we have a little bit of a switch. And so we have Thomas Chomko. Is that how you say it?
Hi.
Hi.
Chomko.
Chomko. Okay. I don't want to say it wrong.
It's new for me also.
That's pretty funny. And Stacy Kahn. And we have a last-minute substitution. Hi, Jerry. This is Jerry. Jerry Mahoney. So there's a little bit of crossover that you're going to hear from, I think, the panel you just heard and this panel. And I think that's part of the theme, is to try to give you guys a sense of the lay of the land out there so you know what questions to ask, what to look out for, what possibly can go wrong. Not because we want to scare you, but more we want to make sure you have as much education as possible on your journey and moving forward. So, and I know we have a short amount of time, so I don't want to spend a lot of time speaking. I'm going to ask Thomas, if you don't mind, to go first.
Sure.
And talk about I was going to say ups and downs, but I think it was probably more downs that you're going to tell us about, so that we can understand what it is that we should look out for.
We'll do both sides.
Okay,
My name is Thomas Chomko. I'm a global education director for a cosmetics company called Flora CA. My husband and I got married a little over a year ago and knew right away that we wanted to have a large family. And we booked our wonderful honeymoon, and one night while we were planning our wedding, we found a company based in Mexico in the same area we had booked our honeymoon. So we thought, this is a sign. We should just go with it. This is meant to be. And we went to Mexico, we explored this avenue, and we fell in love with the people that we met. And we wanted a baby so desperately that, hindsight, well, looking back, we had baby eyes. And I call baby eyes the eyes of love, the eyes of want, the eyes of neglecting to see the reality of certain things, and also the unknown. And there were a lot of things that I wish I would have done, but I'm very happy to say that my son is here today, and he's 6 weeks old. And our journey has been incredible, and the whole reason why I wanted to rush here is to share some things that I wish I would have done. And number one, the insurance company that I currently hold is Blue Cross Blue Shield, and although I was assured that I had coverage internationally, my son was born with some complications, and although my company had assured me that we would have coverage, we in fact did not. They did not set up direct billing. They were not flexible to work with. We are still currently working with the claims division. I now would, hindsight looking back, purchase international medical coverage and really make sure that I'm covered in that country well in advance. That was a really, really, really big error on that part. The next piece was a lot of the documentation of the surrogate screening I would ask for well in advance before signing any kind of contract. Really having the paperwork with clearly some specific sensitive information blacked out, but blood work, STDs, all of those specific things that you would look for in a surrogate, to not have all of those pre-screenings, to have that documentation when working internationally. I would also know that when working with Mexico, you need to have a lot of legal representation that is very extensive, which requires you here in the U.S. to do something that's called having your documents apostilled, which in some states can vary, and the timing can vary, and we found out very, very, very late in our pregnancy, so we had to rush through that process, and it cost us quite a bit more in order to do that, which was a big surprise. And then also the legal representation in Mexico. When we first embarked on our journey with our original organization, which we ended up with a different one, our original organization had set up our documentation, and it was not actually legally binding in Mexico. So we had to outsource through our next agency in the back, Surrogacy Beyond Borders, who were kind enough to help us in the last part of our journey. Set up the right legal documentation with our surrogate so that we could leave the country in a very fast and appropriate time. And we were so lucky to start to finish, from actually getting to the embassy. We had our passport, we were back in our country in under 5 days. So they were able to expedite our process very quickly. So,
Okay, can I just ask you how long your journey was, start to finish?
I stutter because I feel very sensitive to those that have difficult times going through IVF. We were fortunate
I think I was more in terms of when you started down your journey with your first organization until you were able to come home with your beautiful blessing.
We were pregnant on the first try, and Michael was in intensive care for about 3.5 weeks. So our entire process took us just under a year.
Oh, okay. All right.
Because of the first try.
Okay.
We were actually,
Thank you.
yeah, that's
Okay. We're going to hold questions. I'm going to ask Jerry if he would speak next and introduce yourself a little bit in terms of, since I haven't met you yet.
Okay.
We just met like just now.
Yeah.
So I'm going to let you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your journey.
Sure. So I'm Jerry Mahoney, and I am a dad through surrogacy in the U.S. My husband and I had talked a lot about having kids and really didn't know exactly how we were going to go about it. And, originally thought about adoption and realized there are a lot of hurdles involved there. I think when I first heard about surrogacy, I had the same reaction that Mr. Weil, the other Jerry was up here earlier, was saying, like, oh no, I could never do that. And it was only as I learned more about it and got to meet with an agency and heard about what we're doing in the process that I started to open my mind to it and really think, like, oh, maybe this would be a good way for us to grow our family. My husband and I thought a lot about our egg donor and had a lot of trouble kind of deciding on an egg donor. Ended up losing a surrogate because we hadn't chosen an egg donor yet. She dropped out because she was in more of a hurry than we were. We thought about asking his sister to be our egg donor. And I was very alarmed listening to Kim earlier talking about how she's had like more than half of the people who've gone down the road with somebody they knew or a family member kind of privately coming to her and saying, I really want to do this. And that was our big fear, is that if we asked her, she might feel like she had to say yes, and she wouldn't feel like she could back out. And so we decided not to ask her. And she eventually, when we lost the surrogate, she came to us and said, like, why don't you just take my eggs? And it was then that kind of changed, and we thought, like, okay, well, if she's really on board with this, maybe we should pursue it. And we still wanted her to go through all the process and have the psychological screening and make sure she considered everything. She was 28 years old, which is maybe on the upper end of what egg donors are preferred to be. But, in perfect health, she was single, wanted to have kids of her own someday, but did not yet have kids of her own. And we kind of thought, like, what happens if we have a kid with her eggs and she never had a kid of her own? We went through all the possible scenarios of what could go wrong and thought about it and ended up, deciding to go forward. And through the process, we had her also medically screened by the clinic, and the doctor, did an ultrasound, found out she was in perfect health, she had plenty of healthy follicles, said she's an ideal egg donor, definitely approved of her, she got approval from the psychologists and everything. And so as we went down the road, the doctor then went to do the first egg retrieval several months later. And after she'd been on the fertility drugs for months, she produced a total of 7 eggs, which is quite low. You'd expect her to have a few dozen. And that was 7 eggs, not embryos. Once we fertilized, only 3 of the embryos actually took. And the doctor kind of had a very difficult meeting with us and said, I don't know if we can even go ahead with the transfer. I don't think your sister-in-law is very fertile, and I'm very concerned about her ability to ever have children of her own. And it was just kind of devastating to us because here she is doing this amazing thing for us, and we're so grateful to her, and we're also excited to do this cool thing, and she gets the worst news of her life. And we ended up transferring all 3 embryos to the surrogate because the doctor was concerned. He recommended we transfer all 3, and none of them took. And the doctor told us, listen, if this were not your sister-in-law or your sister, I would recommend you change egg donors. This person is not a good egg donor now. If she were just a random person, I would definitely recommend you find somebody else. But because she's your sister-in-law and she was still gung-ho, still wanted to try again, he ended up upping her doses of all the meds because he had taken it easy on her the first time. Kind of gave her the legal, ethical limits, whatever he felt comfortable, the most he'd given to somebody. And we went through the process again. And we thought, okay, well this time, now she's on a lot more drugs, she's going to produce more eggs, and again she produced exactly 7 eggs. So we kind of knew that was sort of our last chance with her. We were not going to make her go through all of this again. And again, we got 3 embryos. The embryos were very good quality, thankfully. But the doctor said, there's no reason to save any embryos at this point. Like, you need to transfer all 3. And we transferred all 3 embryos, and amazingly, we found out we were pregnant. And so, again, this all came with the caveat of, I don't know if your sister is ever going to be able to get pregnant on her own eggs. And so, just to just to yada yada most of my story, we did end up we had twins, and my sister-in-law ended up later on having a baby of her own. And in fact, my husband has a gay brother who also, once we've had kids, they were like, hey, I want to do that. They didn't like the idea of using my sister-in-law as their egg donor, so they found their own egg donor, but then she offered to be their surrogate for them, and so she actually carried their baby, who was born last December. So she's kind of done the trifecta now. She's a mother in her own right, an egg donor, and a surrogate. So she's the most amazing person I know. And so so we faced a lot of setbacks along the way, but thankfully.
So it sounds like we have 2 sort of happy ending stories when you thought you guys were going to hear all horror stories for this panel, which of course makes me happy. But I do, and I'm going to talk to Stacy in a second, but I do just want to go back for a second to Thomas and put you on the spot a little bit about, you alluded to some of the bumps that you had before you found the wonderful program that you did work with. And what were the questions you wish you had asked them before you started that perhaps might help educate the people in the room here today?
I've thought long and hard about this, and in fact, there are just good people in the world, and then there are just bad people in the world. And a lot of the questions that I wish I would have asked, I actually did ask, and was lied to. And so when I came back and talked about documentation and revisiting, Skyping or more communication, those were more of the lessons learned. And I would have initially, now looking back, I would have requested more contact with my surrogate from the very beginning. About halfway through the process, my surrogate contacted me and informed me that she was in very uncomfortable living situations, and we felt that it was a very urgent matter, and we worked with Surrogacy Beyond Borders to help extract her from her current housing, which she was being mistreated, and get her properly cared for. And from that moment on, my surrogate and I would speak almost on a daily, if not daily, it's a weekly basis, and it formed a very close relationship. And the next piece is the translation piece. I don't speak Spanish. I sure love to eat Mexican food, but I do not speak Spanish. I thought that I would do a better job in Mexico, but unfortunately, no. No bueno, that didn't work. So I would definitely look at having a great translation app or a translator there to help guide you through making sure things happen. And again, back to legal representation from the very start, the right legal representation, the right lawyer to enforce the things that you require in your document from the very start. And those things were not enforced. And unfortunately, the only way to really monitor that is through constant Skype, right legal documentation, and constant visits, possibly.
Okay,
And
thanks.
that kinda
Yeah, I'll add to that in a minute. But now I'm going to have Stacy speak to us, who actually had a nice journey, which is a great thing. But I think she has some great takeaways in terms of making questions and information you can get from the very beginning to make sure you have the kind of journey she had.
So I am a parent of almost 3-year-old twins through India, and I'll share my story later in a different panel, but wanted to talk about what my husband and I thought about before we started the journey. So what could go wrong and how did we cope? So one of the things was just from the beginning, what happens if we're not successful? So we felt like we were going to commit to 3 tries of IVF with the clinic that we were at. No questions asked as far as between my husband and I, are we making the right decision? Should we keep emotionally invested in this? It was sort of a 3 tries and we're out, or 3 tries and we're going to talk about it, basically. So that just helped me kind of emotionally think about how we were going down this journey, that we weren't necessarily going to be successful on the first try and be devastated if it didn't happen. And financially, that was something that we were prepared to commit to. The other thing was, from a medical point of view, is the care that our surrogate was going to receive. Were we prepared if we had heard that the clinic we were using, the pregnant surrogates tended to spend a lot of time in the hospital? How are we going to handle that? We decided that we felt actually more comfortable that if the doctor felt that that the surrogate needed to be in the hospital, that we were prepared to just pay that fee because we felt that they were getting proper care. So that was something that, from a financial resources point of view, we were prepared to just invest in, if you will. But one of the biggest challenges that my husband and I had to deal with was thinking about what would happen if we had a baby early and had extended time in India. What would we do? From a job point of view, do we have jobs that could we quit our jobs? Could we take leave of absence? What kind of financial resources do we have to live in India for 3 months or for 2 months? And that was a hurdle that I think, from people I've talked to, not everybody thinks about that. They think their baby comes at 40 weeks and they're perfectly happy, and 2 weeks later we leave, so it's really just a 2-week vacation in India, right? So we were really spent a lot of time on that and realized that we had the flexibility, and this was something we could do, and that we had talked to other intending parents about the quality of the care that was received. We talked to many friends that are of Indian origin, friends from Delhi where we were at, that the quality of the care was going to be meeting our standards. But that is something I think, if you're looking into international service, you should really think about, is what happens when you find yourself in a foreign country by yourself with a newborn or 2 newborns. What kind of network are you going to have there? Do you need to bring mom and dad or grandparents or aunts or uncles to help you deal with this crying baby that you now have no idea what to do with? Or worse, a sick crying baby. How are you going to deal with that? So those were kind of some of the risks that we thought about. From a legal point of view, we contacted the embassy. We made sure that we understood who had the right to the baby when they were born, what kind of legal scenarios could pop up, and how would we deal with that. So we talked to lawyers, we talked to friends, we talked to the embassy, and ultimately we felt comfortable with the risks that were there, because no matter where you do surrogacy, there are plenty of risks, and ultimately we didn't have to deal with any of these, but we definitely prepared for it and talked a lot about it, because as some of the parents who didn't have as smooth of a journey as I will talk about this afternoon, it can be very challenging.
So you'll see, I think that there were a number of topics that they just raised, and all day so far. I think all of you in the room that are looking into this avenue for family building can see from all the conversations that it takes a team to make this journey work and work well. And I think that if you understand that going into this, that you're not going to be alone on this journey, but you have to know who are those team players, and whether it's doing it in the United States or internationally, or you're coming or going, you need to know, I think, take away today what that team looks like. And for sure, you need to consult with attorneys both here and there, whether you're coming from abroad or going abroad, because we are not all experts in everything. And anyone who tells you that they are, don't work with that person, because we can't all be experts in everything, and we don't want to be, because that means you're not expert in anything. So I think knowing who to talk to from the very beginning, finding, and if you're working with an agency or a program, if they're not telling you who those people are, maybe you shouldn't be working with that program. Because if you're working with a program who, understands those pieces, they're going to refer you to those pieces. But also, I think in light of what Thomas was saying, you have to really do your due diligence, because, we were talking earlier, and it's one of my pet peeves, so people who know me know this. The word agency in this field, and this is not meant to offend anybody in the room, I hope, doesn't mean anything. It's not a regulated industry nationally or internationally, and anybody can call themselves an agency. So you need to know that going into this process, because most people, smart people, think that if you're called an agency, it means you're regulated, it means something. In this field, it means nothing. So you need to know that going into it, so that you understand, do your due diligence, ask for references, talk to other physicians and doctors and psychologists and attorneys in the field who have been in the field, so that they can best advise you along the way. Are you working with a program that's established and they're known in the field and known to do their job and do it well? You brought something up very first, insurance. Insurance is a huge issue. Steve brought it up at the very beginning, and we can't say it enough, because I think people don't understand how complicated it is, and that's part of your team. Everybody, again, just because I'm a lawyer in the field, or there are agencies who've been in the field for a long time, doesn't mean they know how to investigate and check in insurance, whether it's newborn insurance, whether it's insurance there, wherever there is, or here. You want to make sure that part of your team understands that piece of it and is checking it both for the surrogate as well as for you and your child or children. So that is a huge, huge question that you want to check and recheck. And even if an agency is saying that they've vetted insurance, let's say for a surrogate, you want to ask them, how did they vet that? What does that look like? Do they have a clearance letter or some piece of paper or information that you understand? Just because a surrogate says she has insurance doesn't mean she has insurance that will be applicable to the pregnancy and delivery. So you really want to get into the weeds of understanding, what does that clearance look like? What do your background checks look like? What is your, Kim went through a really fabulous checklist of what each and every person, or agency or program should be doing. Now, I will tell you, not every program will do the full medical screening, including the HSG, which I think, you said that you guys do. But certainly you want to make sure those background checks are being done, financial checks, psychological evaluation, all of those important pieces, because, I think Kim alluded to this. Of course, everybody down this journey wants to be a parent now, and we know it is not linear. I love that you said that, and it's a process, and I think if you understand going into it, it's going to take some time for it to be done, but to be done right, then you'll be okay, whether you're going overseas or whether you're doing it here. You also mentioned the support, the support that you feel, the support system. And I think that that's really important too for on all fronts, including if you're working with a program, whether it's here or internationally, what is the support system of that program, of that agency? Because I thought that was really something important that you just mentioned, especially if you're here and you're working overseas. I think Thomas alluded to that in particular, that you didn't, with the first company you were working with, didn't have that support. So what does that look like? You really want to understand that. And I think that Jerry brought up something really important about medical bumps and where those can be, and understanding those. And maybe that gets to the informed consent that Kim was talking about. But I think that you spoke about something that, when we think of what can go wrong, we're thinking, at least I was thinking of, sort of technically what can go wrong in terms of the pieces. But, you talked about what the medical bumps too, which I think everybody has to understand going into it. No matter what the checks and balances are, those are the bumps we can't control for, are the medical bumps. But to the extent we can, we want to make sure that they are. I don't know if you guys, I don't know what our time is. I think we have a few more minutes. Okay. So I don't know if you guys want to jump in with some other things that you want to say to everybody here that, make sure you ask this question. Jerry?
Boy, I mean, it's tough for me to say. I definitely feel like hearing everybody's perspective, I feel very grateful that we use an agency and that we stayed domestic, because I think they take care of so much of that stuff. And we kind of, we went in and they initially told us, okay, here's what we're going to do for you, and here's the screening that we do, and here's the when we'll file the pre-birth order and stuff like this. And we knew we would both be on the birth certificate because we were in California. So, I think my main advice would be you can't possibly learn everything you need to know in the amount of time people usually want to do this. So find somebody knowledgeable and trustworthy who is going to be your advocate, who can answer all your questions and help you over all the bumps that will pop up. Because I feel very grateful knowing that. And we definitely went sort of a premium route. We paid a lot of money, and I feel very, very grateful that things worked out the way they did for us.
Thanks. Do you want to add anything to that?
I would probably add a couple things. The first one is the how to cope piece. Going into surrogacy, we knew it wasn't going to be a perfect journey. And in our first year of marriage alone, that was a big task to undertake. And going through all the obstacles that we did go through, and the hurdles, and the constant mistakes or errors and changes and glitches, really the how to cope piece, having my husband and our, like what you had said, pre-conversation, we did something similar. So we turned to each other for all of these incredible moments that could be life-changing or shocking, and having a partner, a significant other, a family member, or a resource to be able to turn to talk about how you're feeling and to be able to deal and accept and make a decision to move forward is very important. I would say, especially in international surrogacy, because your hands are a little bit more tied because they are so far away.
Yeah, and I think one of the things also that's come up is, especially with international surrogacy, the laws, the laws change here in the United States too, but there's a lot of unknown. And again, that's why you should speak to attorneys in the country that you're dealing with, so you understand if that's precarious or not precarious. And also for your particular situation, whether you're a heterosexual couple, if you're single, if you're gay dads, if you're gay moms, what does that all look like? You need to understand for your own specific parameters, what are we looking at? You don't want to go into it, blind and say, okay, it'll work out fine, it'll all be fine, and we'll get home after a 40-week pregnancy with our children or child. You don't want to be caught, and we've certainly seen cases over the last few years where we have people stuck in countries where they're not from, and we've seen children be born and be considered stateless. So that also is something I think all this conversation today, we're talking a lot about you guys being parents, and we're not talking so much about the children themselves, and we have to think about the children too. At the end of the day, this is about creating a family and a baby, and we want to make sure everybody's protected. And as much as you can do on the front end, that's what you want to do. Go ahead, Stacey.
The one thing I would add with international surrogacy is, if you're a U.S. citizen, definitely contact the embassy before you do anything, because they will also sort of alert you to any potential changes that they anticipate. They will make sure that, they, at least in India, it's very clear what it takes to become a U.S. citizen for the child. And I think if you don't meet those criteria, and you don't meet the criteria that specifically in India that they legally require for you to be a parent through surrogacy, that's a big red flag. And if your clinic isn't on top of it and telling you that they can't help you because you don't meet either the U.S. or the India criteria, that's the first red flag to find a different clinic. The other thing I would just like to add is I think it's been fairly clear that communication is probably the most important part of this journey because it's an emotional and challenging journey no matter what path it takes. So making sure that you get answers to the questions you want. They may not be the questions that I may have different questions than Jerry, but making sure that you are getting those is probably the most important thing. I would imagine our doctor in India would say we were fairly demanding clients because my husband made it very clear that he wanted the answers now, and he wanted them to the standard that he demanded. And I don't necessarily know that I know that the doctor we used wasn't used to giving those answers in the detail that we demanded them from her. And as long as, and eventually we got to a point where it was perfectly fine because we understood where each of us were coming from and got the answers we needed. And I think that was one of the keys to making our journey pretty successful, or very successful as kids.
And I'd just like to add, you deserve that.
Absolutely.
You deserve all the answers to all of your questions. You deserve to know it should be a completely transparent process. And that's one of the things I believe in most strongly because it's not only how much you're paying for it, but it's just because of the nature of what you're doing. You're creating a life. You're creating your family. There's so much potential for, ethical gray areas or, shady business practices. And it's your responsibility ultimately to make sure that you are comfortable with the way you've gone through everything, that you've dealt with reputable people, and that everything has been handled in the way that you would want it to be. So definitely ask the hard questions and make sure you get the answers. And if you don't, find somebody else to work with.
Perfect. I think that's the perfect note to end this on. I think we're exactly right on time. Ho, ho. Thank you. And I'm sure there'll be time for questions.